The theatre glowed with a warm, golden hum, the kind that wrapped itself around every surface and every whisper. I remember standing in the narrow corridor behind the presidential box, the polished wood beneath my boots vibrating softly with the laughter of the crowd. They were absorbed in the play, lost in comedy, unaware of the weight gathering just beyond their sight. My heartbeat wasn't frantic. It was steady, even calm. Too calm, perhaps. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind so many times that my thoughts moved with a strange, eerie smoothness. I believed, with all the certainty a man can muster, that I was stepping into a role history had written for me. I told myself this was destiny, that the world would understand. One day. I told myself many things in those final quiet breaths before I opened the door. The corridor felt narrow. The air was warm, tinged with candle smoke, and the faint sweetness of perfume drifting from the audience below. Voices fluttered like birds beneath the balcony. The soft shuffle of stage actors reached me between lines of dialogue. Everything felt close, suspended, waiting. My fingers brushed the small derringer at my side. Not shaking, not hesitant, just ready. Behind that door sat the man I believed to be the architect of the nation's undoing. A figure wrapped in applause and affection, carried by the adoration of a crowd that could not see what I saw, or thought I saw. I felt righteous, absolute, as if the path before me had been carved in stone long before I took my first step down it. A sliver of doubt flickered somewhere deep inside, faint enough to ignore. I brushed it aside. I told myself that history favoured the bold, that nations were shaped by decisive acts. I stood very still for a moment, listening to the actor's voice carry across the hall. The audience responded with soft laughter. They were so unaware, so innocent in their comfort. I placed my hand on the doorframe. The polished wood felt warm under my palm. I inhaled slowly, letting the breath steady my thoughts. I told myself I was about to change the fate of the country. I told myself I was doing what no one else had the courage to do. I told myself I was stepping into the pages of history. I opened the door. The presidential box was dimmer than the hallway, lit by a few flickering lamps that cast long shadows across the ornate curtains. The scent of velvet and wax filled the small room. He sat there, relaxed, amused, leaning slightly forward as he watched the stage. The glow of the lamp haloed him softly. For a heartbeat, something inside me faltered. Not doubt exactly, more like the sudden weight of the moment settling into my bones. A realization that once I crossed this threshold, nothing, not a single breath, could ever be undone. But I pushed through it. Momentum carried me. Purpose carried me. The version of myself I had built for this night carried me. I stepped forward. The sound of the play swelled behind me, masking my movement. The floor creaked the smallest amount under my boot, but no one turned. No one noticed. The room felt suspended outside of time, as if the world held its breath. My hand tightened around the derringer. I raised it. The air seemed to thicken, heavy with expectation. My mind sharpened to a single point, erasing everything: future, past, doubt, consequence. And then the moment arrived. There was no dramatic pause, no thunderclap, no divine sign from above. Just my breath, the warmth of the lamp, the faint laughter from the stage, and the small, decisive motion of my finger as the trigger was pulled. A crack, sharp, contained, split the air. The world did not freeze the way I imagined it would. It surged forward. Gasps erupted. Someone screamed. A woman lurched upward, knocking over her chair. The stage noise faltered. My heart didn't leap or stumble. It marched on, steady as a drum. The deed was done. History had fractured. And I, in that instant, believed I had done what fate demanded. But even as I turned to flee, even as adrenaline surged into my limbs, a quiet whisper crawled beneath my certainty. Too thin to name, too faint to understand. A whisper that would grow louder with every mile of my escape. The moment after the shot unfurled in a blur, shouts rising, bodies shifting, the air itself seeming to recoil. But I didn't stay to see any of it. My legs were already moving. The narrow confines of the box pressed around me as I lunged toward the balcony's edge. Every rehearsal of this moment had felt precise, controlled, elegant even. But reality never mirrors the mind's staging. My boots hit the railing. The lamp's glow flickered across my field of vision. For a split second, I saw the chaos blooming behind me, faces twisting, eyes widening, hands reaching. And then I jumped. The landing was wrong the instant my foot touched the stage. I had practiced the leap, calculated the distance, imagined myself descending like an actor making a dramatic entrance. But the spur on my boot caught on the flag or a drape. I still don't know which. Instead of a clean landing, I crashed down hard. A shock bolted through my leg, biting deep. Pain stabbed upward into my calf, my knee, my hip. The audience gasped again, mistaking my fall for part of the performance. Or perhaps they simply couldn't grasp that the scene before them was real. I forced myself upright, collapsing inward around the pain. My body trembled, not with fear, but with the white-hot clarity of sudden injury. I staggered a step, then another, pushing through it. My voice rose, loud and fierce, proclaiming the motto I had believed would carry me into legend. The words rang through the theatre, echoing unevenly. But even as they left my mouth, I felt the first small rupture inside me, like a thread snapping somewhere deep. It was not regret. Not yet. More a sense that the certainty I had worn like armour was beginning to flex, to creak under its own weight. The backstage door waited like a dark mouth. I dove through it, limping heavily, breath tearing through my chest. Behind me, the theatre erupted into full confusion. Screams, shouts, pounding footsteps. The actors scattered. Someone called for help. The building seemed to tilt with noise, but the passage ahead was narrow and still, leading to the street where my horse waited. Each step I took sent a sharp jolt through my injured leg. Sweat pricked across my forehead. The cool air outside hit me like a wash of water, clearing my mind for a fleeting moment. My horse stamped anxiously against the cobblestones, sensing the tension. I pulled myself into the saddle, nearly slipping from the surge of pain. The horse jerked beneath me, thrown off by my imbalance. My teeth clenched. I held the reins tight, willing my body to stay upright. Behind me, men poured from the theatre doors, voices shouting, questions flying. I dug my heels into the horse's sides. We bolted. The streets of Washington blurred past, lamplight streaking into lines, shadows stretching across brick walls. The hooves hammered out a frantic rhythm beneath us. For a moment, the rush drowned out everything, the pain, the doubt, the echo of the shot still ringing in my ears. But the deeper into the night we rode, the more the world around me seemed to settle, and with that stillness came thought, and with thought came cracks. The certainty that had carried me through the theatre began to thin at its edges. The city wasn't reacting like a nation liberated from a tyrant. No one cheered. No one emerged from their homes in triumph. They chased me. They shouted after me. They cursed. My breathing grew ragged. The pain in my leg sharpened, pulsing with every hoofbeat. I pressed a hand to my thigh, feeling the swelling through the fabric. The injury was worse than I wanted to admit. A clean escape was possible only in the stories I had told myself. I left the city lights behind. Darkness swallowed us. Trees, fields, the scent of fresh earth, the distant call of night insects. The road felt endless, stretched thin beneath the weight of my own racing thoughts. This was supposed to be simple. History was supposed to understand. People were supposed to see what I saw. But the night did not welcome me as a hero. It swallowed me like a fugitive. As we rode further into the countryside, a cold breeze rose from the fields and slipped beneath my coat. The wind carried no triumph, no vindication. It whispered doubts I tried to ignore, doubts that grew louder with each passing mile. Pain, darkness. The sound of pursuit behind me fading, but not entirely gone. The deed is done, I muttered to myself, as if speaking the words could make them true in the way I intended. But for the first time, another thought answered back. And what if it was a terrible mistake? I gripped the reins tighter, pushing the whisper away. At least for now. At least until the next mile. But no matter how fast I rode, the question followed. The night stretched on, long and uneven, the road beneath my horse turning rough and rutted as the lights of Washington vanished entirely behind us. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting a line of men with torches to materialize along the horizon, or a troop of cavalry cresting the ridge at full gallop. But the darkness remained empty, silent. Only the wind chased me now, cold and sharp against my face. My injured leg throbbed relentlessly. Each hoofbeat sent a shock of pain spiraling upward, making my grip on the saddle tighten, until the leather bit into my palm. I tried shifting my weight, leaning forward, leaning back, anything to ease the agony. But nothing worked. The injury had dug itself into me. A constant reminder that my grand plan had faltered at the very start. Still, I pressed on. Fields unfolded on either side of the road, silvered by the moon, rippling softly in the breeze. The vastness of the Maryland countryside should have felt liberating, but tonight it felt like a great emptiness waiting to swallow me whole. Every farmhouse window, dark or dimly lit, felt like a watchful eye. Every rustle in the hedges felt like men crouching in wait. I caught myself glancing toward the sky, searching for an omen, something to reassure me that I had done the right thing. But the stars gave no answer. The clouds drifted lazily, indifferent. The moon cast its pale light without judgment. I muttered under my breath, trying to steady the racing in my mind. It was necessary, I told myself. It was just. The country needed this. The South will rise again because of this. I said these words with the confidence of a man repeating a mantra he'd memorized, but somewhere beneath them, a faint tremor threaded through. Not doubt, not yet, but something thinner, something like a slow leak in a ship's hull. Something that, given enough miles, might sink me entirely. The road narrowed as it slipped between two tree lines. Branches arched overhead, forming a dark canopy that blocked the moonlight. Shadows knotted together, deep and impenetrable. My horse hesitated. I urged him onward. The woods swallowed us. Inside, the air felt different. Closer, heavier. The scent of damp bark and cold soil pressed in on me. Owls called from high branches. Twigs cracked under the horse's hooves, echoing too loudly for comfort. Every sound magnified. It was here, in the thick quiet of the forest, that the first real seed of fear rooted itself. Not fear of capture, not fear of death, but fear that the night itself might turn against me. I kept seeing faces in the dark, soldiers, agents, nameless men who might already know exactly what I had done. I imagined them waiting behind trees, muskets raised, breathing slow and steady. I imagined the moment they would strike. But when I blinked, the shadows dissolved into nothing. Still, the fear remained. My horse staggered suddenly, slowed, then shook his head with a sharp snort. I leaned down to pat his neck, whispering for calm. But I felt it too, the unease settling thick around us, like the forest itself sensed the fracture in my mind. The pain in my leg pulsed once more, stronger than before. Sweat gathered at my temples. My breath grew shallow. I gripped the reins harder, forcing myself to stay upright. "You're Booth," I whispered to myself. "You are meant for this moment. You will be remembered." But the words tasted different now, what? Thin, brittle, like leaves crumbling between my fingers. I thought of the theatre again. The brief flicker of hesitation before the shot. The faces turning toward me. The stunned horror. The scream that rose somewhere in the audience, sharp enough to cut through my memory even now. I had expected something else. I had expected triumph, a swell of righteousness, a spark of destiny. But instead, I had leapt into chaos, into pain, into doubt. The horse broke free of the trees, and we emerged into a stretch of open land once more. Far in the distance, I saw the faint glow of a farmhouse, my first stop, a place I had counted on, a place I believed would help me. My breath steadied, if only slightly. The pain in my legs still flared. The fear still tightened around my ribs. But I pressed forward. Some part of me still clung to the belief that I had done something great, something history would praise. But another part, small and quiet, whispered beneath it. And what if they don't? What if they never will? I shook the thought away, spurred my horse onward, and aimed for the faint glow of the farmhouse ahead. The night was far from over, and neither was the unravelling. The faint glow of the farmhouse pulled me in like a lone lantern on a vast and silent sea. My horse's hooves thudded unevenly on the dirt road as we approached the small wooden structure. A single candle flickered in the window, too dim to be reassuring and too steady to be ignored. I felt my pulse quicken, a mixture of hope and dread. This place was supposed to be a refuge, a stop I had planned with confidence. But the night had a way of turning certainties into shadows. As I neared the gate, pain tore up my leg again, sharper this time, radiating with a heat that made my vision blur for a heartbeat. I gritted my teeth, swallowing down a wave of nausea. The injury was worsening. I had told myself I could manage it, push through it, conquer it with will alone. But willpower was beginning to fray at the edges, stretched thin by miles of darkness and fear. I dismounted with difficulty, nearly collapsing as my injured leg gave way beneath me. My hand shot out, gripping the fence post to steady myself. The wood felt cold, rough beneath my fingers, more real than anything else in the moment. I inhaled sharply, forcing my breath into rhythm. One step, then another. The boards of the porch creaked softly under my weight as I approached the door. I knocked. For a moment, nothing happened. Silence wrapped itself around me, thick and suffocating. Then footsteps moved inside, slow, cautious. The door opened by a narrow crack, revealing the face of Dr. Mudd, still half drenched in sleep and suspicion. His eyes adjusted to the candlelight, then widened at the sight of me. "Booth," he whispered, voice tight. "What on earth—" "Let me in!" I gasped through clenched teeth. "Please!" He hesitated only a second before pulling the door open wider. The warmth of the small farmhouse washed over me, fireplace embers glowing faintly, the smell of wood smoke and worn books settling in the air. It felt like stepping into another world entirely, one separate from the night that hunted me. Dr. Mudd closed the door behind us, his jaw tense as he looked me over. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," I lied, though the sharp pulse in my leg disagreed violently. "Just help me, please." He guided me to a wooden chair near the hearth and lit another lamp. The warm light filled the room, revealing the growing stain of blood on my pant leg. The sight turned my stomach, not from the wound itself, but from what it symbolized. weakness, the collapse of control I had clung to so tightly. Dr. Mudd knelt beside me, unfastening the fabric carefully. His fingers pressed gently around the injured area, and pain shot through me like fire. I hissed, gripping the sides of the chair. "You've broken something," he murmured. "And the swelling? Booth, what happened?" I swallowed hard, staring into the flames. "I did what had to be done." He paused. The silence between us thickened. "Is it true then?" he whispered. "The news from town, was it really you?" I didn't answer. The answer filled the room without being spoken. Dr. Mudd exhaled slowly, a sound weighted with disbelief and dread. He turned back to my leg, setting the bone with a pull that nearly dragged a cry from my throat. The pain was blinding, hot, and merciless. For a moment my vision swam, the room dissolving into a haze of motion and heat. When the pain softened to a dull roar, Dr. Mudd began to wrap the leg. "You shouldn't have come here. You've brought danger to my door." "I had nowhere else," I said, though the words felt thin, fragile. "You were part of the plan." He froze. "Plan," he repeated bitterly. "Booth, this wasn't a plan. This was madness." I stiffened, a spark of my old certainty flaring. "Madness? No, no. What I did tonight will be remembered. It had purpose. The country." But even as I said it, the words felt heavier than before, less like a declaration and more like an echo of a belief I was struggling to keep afloat. Dr. Mudd didn't argue. He didn't need to. The silence between us argued for him. He finished binding the leg and stood slowly, wiping his hands on a cloth. The candlelight flickered across his face, revealing worry lines etched deep. He paced a few steps, then turned back to me. "They will hunt you," he said quietly. "The entire government, every man with a badge, every soldier still stationed in Washington." I lifted my chin. "Let them come." But the words rang hollow. Even I could hear it. Dr. Mudd looked toward the window. "You can't stay. Not long. Rest for a moment, but then you must go." A tremor ran through me. Not from rage, but from fear. Real fear. The kind that couldn't be buried beneath ideology. I whispered. "I thought there would be support." Dr. Mudd didn't respond. He didn't need to. His silence was the answer. My certainty, once a roaring fire, shrunk to something thin and flickering. And somewhere deep inside me, a quiet voice whispered the truth I still refused to say aloud. You may have doomed yourself. And for what? The night outside Dr. Mudd's farmhouse felt colder than before. Colder even than when I first fled the theatre. The wind pressed against my coat with a sharp insistence, as if trying to push me back inside, back into the warmth I had just abandoned. But I couldn't stay. The doctor's eyes had made that clear. Fearful, distant, burdened. Even he had recoiled from what I had done. My horse pawed anxiously at the ground, sensing my pain, my uncertainty, my unravelling. The leg throbbed with every shift of weight, a deep, pulsing heat that radiated upward like fire climbing a fuse. I clenched my jaw and hoisted myself into the saddle, stifling a groan as the movement tore at the fresh bandaging. Dr. Mudd lingered by the porch, arms crossed against his chest, face carved in a stern, conflicted expression. "You should ride south," he said quietly. "Keep off the main roads. You'll find nothing but danger if you head east." I nodded. "Thank you." The words surprised me in how small they sounded, thin, lacking the conviction I had always carried like armour. Dr. Mudd gave no reply. He turned away, extinguishing the lamp inside his home. The porch fell into darkness, leaving me alone with the creaking boards, the restless wind, and the heavy silence of a man who did not dare risk more than he already had. I tugged the reins and urged my horse forward. The road beyond the farmhouse unravelled across the countryside like a pale ribbon, barely visible beneath the patchwork of moonlight and drifting cloud shadows. Trees swayed at either side, branches scraping softly against each other, whispering in voices I almost felt I could understand. It struck me then. This was the first time I had truly been alone tonight. In the theatre, there were crowds. On the ride out, adrenaline drowned thought. At the doctor's home, there was another heartbeat beside mine. But out here, the only sound was the hoarse breath of my horse and the ragged cadence of my own. A strange sensation settled over me, something between dread and clarity. With nothing but the night to occupy my mind, the first true doubts began to rise, not as fleeting flickers, but as steady, persistent shapes forming in the dark. What if the newspapers would not praise my deed? What if the South would not rise as I imagined? What if the world saw me not as a saviour, but as a villain? My stomach tightened. I tried to shake the thought away, focusing instead on the rhythm of the horse beneath me. But the questions kept returning, stronger each time, like waves striking a ship too damaged to withstand them. As the miles dragged on, my legs' pain grew sharper, gnawing at my endurance. Sweat gathered at my temples despite the chill. The horse slowed. I pressed a palm to his neck, murmuring for him to keep going. "You're carrying history. You're carrying me toward a future they will remember." But would they? The wind shifted, carrying a faint sound to my ears. Distant hooves. For a moment my heart lurched, convinced the hunters were upon me. I twisted in the saddle, scanning the horizon, but saw nothing but darkness and rolling fields. Still, the sound lingered in my mind. I pushed the horse onward, limping through patches of moonlit road. Far ahead, the terrain dipped and rose again, forming a shallow valley of tall grass. Somewhere within it stood the next place on my path. Another safe house, another expected ally. I clung to the hope that someone, anyone, would understand, would share my beliefs, would help me continue the flight I had begun so decisively. But as we descended into the valley, I noticed a new sensation creeping into my chest. Not triumph, not purpose, but loneliness. Heavy, unfamiliar loneliness. I had always imagined myself surrounded by like-minded men, by supporters. But the reality forming around me was stark and cold. No one was waiting on the road. No lantern signalled safety. No voice called out in welcome. My thoughts drifted to the moment in the theatre, the flash, the pull of the trigger, the eruption that followed. I had imagined that single act would reshape a nation. But now, replaying it in my mind, I found no glory, no triumph, just a sharp, echoing noise swallowed by screams. I bit down hard, forcing the doubt aside. "You did what had to be done," I muttered. Men of history are never understood in their own time. But the words no longer lifted me. They weighed me down. At the far end of the valley, a dark structure rose against the horizon, a barn or an outbuilding. Relief sparked faintly in my chest. Shelter. Rest. Maybe even someone willing to help. I nudged the horse forward, feeling the last of my strength flicker. The night seemed to lean in around me, listening, waiting. And as I approached that lonely building, one truth settled, cold and steady in my bones. The farther I rode, the smaller my certainty became. And the more the night revealed just how alone I truly was. The barn came into view like a dark, leaning shadow against the night sky. Its roof sagged in places, patched with mismatched boards, and the wide doors hung slightly crooked. No lantern, no sign of life. Just a structure waiting in the cold valley, offering shelter or warning. I couldn't yet tell which. My horse slowed as we reached it, exhausted from miles of uneven road. I slid off the saddle, but my injured leg nearly buckled beneath me. I caught myself against the barn door, breath hissing through clenched teeth. The pain was worse now, deep, pulsing, almost feverish. I pushed the door open. It groaned softly, an old, weary sound. Inside, darkness settled thick around me, heavy with the scent of hay and dust. My horse followed, grateful for the stillness. I closed the door behind us and let myself sink onto a mound of hay in the corner. Even that slight movement sent a sharp jolt up my leg. My fingers dug into the straw as I waited for the wave of pain to crest and fall. When it finally eased to a tolerable throb, I leaned back against the wall, sweat dampening my collar despite the chill. The barn was quiet. Too quiet. Wood shifted overhead, beams settling with tired pops and creaks. The wind slipped through cracks in the walls, carrying thin ribbons of moonlight that cut through the dark. Dust rose in slow spirals, visible only when the moonlight brushed them. It should have been calming. It wasn't. In the stillness, my mind filled the empty space with memory. The theatre reappeared behind my eyes, the box's velvet drapes, the lamp's warm glow, the curve of Lincoln's silhouette. I'd imagined the moment as triumphant, symbolic, a stroke of destiny. But now, replaying it in the quiet barn, it felt strangely small, like watching a distant scene through rippling glass. A crack in my confidence widened. I straightened, trying to will the thought away. "This is the price of great acts," I whispered. "History will understand what others cannot." But even I could hear the falter in my voice. My horse shifted nearby, snorting softly. His ears flicked toward the door, as though he sensed something outside. I held my breath, listening. Nothing but wind. Nothing but the restless shifting of old wood. Still. The unease lingered. I wiped sweat from my forehead and looked down at my leg. The bandage Dr. Mudd had wrapped already felt tight, swollen beneath the cloth. Fever pricked the edges of my vision. I could almost feel the injury radiating heat through the fabric. I had told myself I could ride through anything, that conviction and purpose were enough to overcome pain. But tonight had chipped away at both. The road behind me was filled with shouts, chaos, and the first frightening cracks in my certainty. The road ahead was a blur of unknown miles and dwindling allies. The men I once counted on had not appeared. The people I expected to celebrate my deed were silent, and the South, the great cause I had believed in so fiercely, felt impossibly distant beneath the weight of the night. I tried to reassure myself. They will rise. They will see. But another voice slipped quietly between the words. Will they? Or have you mistaken desperation for destiny? I pressed my palms into the hay, trying to ground myself, but the thought clung to me. The barn around me felt too still, as if the world itself were waiting for me to understand something I refused to see. A gust of wind rattled the boards. The horse jerked its head, uneasy. The pain in my leg throbbed again, slow, heavy, demanding. Tomorrow, I told myself. Tomorrow I would reach the river. Tomorrow I would find allies. Tomorrow everything would make sense again. But tonight, the certainty that once burned so brightly flickered like the weak flame of a dying candle. Alone in the barn, with the wind whispering through the cracks, I felt, for the first time, that the night itself was closing in. The first dull light of dawn crept into the barn through thin cracks in the boards. I hadn't slept. Every shift of my leg sent a fresh jolt of pain upward, and every attempt to rest was crushed beneath the weight of replaying the night in fragments. My thoughts circled endlessly, too loud for the silence around me. My horse waited impatiently, sensing my unrest. I pushed myself upright with a groan, leaning heavily on the wooden wall. The bandage around my leg felt tighter, swollen beneath the cloth. Fever clung to my skin. But I couldn't stay here. Every hour wasted was another hour closer to a noose. I opened the barn door. Cold morning air swept in, sharper than I expected. The sky was a pale, colourless sheet, offering no comfort. Birds called from distant branches, indifferent to whatever storm I had placed myself in. Mounting the horse was nearly unbearable. I clenched my teeth until my jaw ached. Still, I forced the horse into motion, guiding him onto the narrow road that sloped toward the marshlands. Mist pooled low across the ground, curling around the horse's legs like thin fingers dragging behind us. This was supposed to be the stage of the plan where allies appeared. Southern sympathizers, hidden safe houses, men ready to protect me. But as we rode, The world felt deserted. No riders, no lantern signals, no voices carried on the wind, only silence and the steady erosion of the certainty I had once held like iron. The horse slogged through the soft mud of the lowland trail. Reeds swayed on either side, tall and whispering in the breeze. Water reflected the pale sky in dark, glassy patches. A heron lifted into the air as we approached, gliding in effortless arcs above the swamp. Its freedom made something in my chest tighten. Every few minutes, I scanned behind us, expecting a patrol, a shadow, a mounted figure cresting the hill. But nothing followed. The emptiness was worse somehow, like the world wasn't even interested in catching me, only watching me with quiet judgment. My leg flared with a deep, throbbing heat. Sweat collected at my temples, despite the cold. The fever was settling in. I could feel its slow creep through my limbs. "You're doing this for history," I whispered, though the words sounded weaker in daylight. Great men face trials. But the conviction wasn't there. Not truly. The night had stripped too much away. I thought of Dr. Mudd, the look in his eyes when he realized what I'd done. Not admiration, not loyalty, fear. And beneath that memory surfaced another. The faces in the theatre when the shot rang out. Shock, confusion, horror, not triumph, not the recognition I imagined. The horse slowed at a fork in the muddy trail. To the right, the ground grew thicker with reeds and water. To the left, a narrow path of firmer earth wound between twisted trees. I tugged the reins left, hoping it would bring me closer to the river. The trees closed around us, bare branches arching overhead. The small sounds of the swamp grew louder. The soft plunk of water droplets, the rustle of reeds, the distant croak of frogs. It all pressed in on me, amplifying every flicker of doubt. What if my so-called allies had already abandoned their part? What if I had believed in loyalty that never truly existed? What if I had been driven more by my own ego than any noble cause? I swallowed hard, gripping the saddle horn as another wave of dizziness washed over me. My vision blurred for a moment. The horse sensed it and slowed again, careful beneath my shifting weight. I straightened, forcing myself back into focus. I couldn't afford weakness. Not now. The Potomac lay ahead, somewhere beyond the marsh, beyond the roads that felt more like traps with every mile. If I could reach Virginia, the plan would regain its shape. Everything would make sense again. It had to. A sudden crack echoed from the trees behind us. I jerked around in the saddle, heart pounding. But the path was empty, nothing but mist and shadows. Still, the unease stayed. The horse stepped forward, his hooves making soft, wet sounds in the mud. And as we continued toward the river, a truth settled into me as quietly as the morning light. I wasn't riding toward destiny anymore. I was riding from it. The trees thinned gradually until the marsh opened into a wide stretch of pale, wavering grass. Beyond it, the Potomac came into view, broad, dark, and moving with a sluggish heaviness under the grey morning light. Seeing it should have brought relief. It was the line I needed to cross, the barrier between danger and the hope of refuge in Virginia. For days, for months, I had imagined reaching it as a triumphant moment. But as I pulled the horse to a halt and stared at the water, no triumph came. Only exhaustion and something colder. The river was wider than I remembered from maps and whispers. The wind swept across its surface, pushing ripples into restless patterns. The smell of mud and wet reeds filled the air. A few broken tree branches jutted from the bank like skeletal fingers reaching toward the current. I dismounted slowly, gripping the saddle until the pain in my legs steadied. The fever pressed at the edges of my vision, making the river blur in and out of focus. I blinked until the horizon sharpened again. This was supposed to feel like progress, a step closer to escape. Instead, I felt strangely exposed, small against the sweep of the water. Somewhere across that dark stretch lay safety, or so I told myself. The horse lowered his head to drink, snorting as the cold water touched his muzzle. I rested a hand on his neck, steadying myself. My leg throbbed violently, rhythmically, as though protesting every second I remained upright. I scanned the opposite bank, half expecting to see someone waiting. An ally with a boat, a signal, something that proved the plan still existed. But the far shore was empty, lined with tangled brush and sloping mud, untouched and indifferent. I let out a frustrated breath. The men who promised to meet me here were nowhere in sight. A chill ran through me, not from the cold, but from the recognition. Piece by piece, the so-called network I depended on had eroded into nothing. First, no escort, then no shelter, now no crossing. Had they fled, been captured, or had they simply decided I wasn't worth the risk? The idea gnawed at me more aggressively than the pain. I crouched near the water's edge, splashing a handful of cold river water on my face. The shock of it cleared my head for a moment, sharp as glass. In the quiet that followed, the thoughts I had been trying to outrun pulled closer, like shadows stepping into the light. I had believed I was acting for a cause, for a nation, for a future I imagined but had never actually seen. But now, in the raw quiet of the riverside, the cause felt distant, imaginary, propped up by pride more than principle. I stared at my reflection in the rippling water, pale, feverish, eyes heavier than I remembered, a ghost of myself, a man moving on momentum alone. History will judge me fairly, I whispered, but the reflection did not nod. The river did not agree. I rose slowly, muscles tightening against the pain. My horse lifted his head, ears twitching toward the woods behind us. I followed his gaze, heart quickening. A gust of wind rustled the reeds, but that was all. No riders, no dogs, no shouts carried on the air. Still, I felt watched. The riverbank felt like a threshold, one I was no longer sure I had the strength or the will to cross. But turning back was not an option. I could not return to the world I had shattered, and I could not stay here, exposed and alone. I paced along the shoreline, scanning for any sign of an abandoned rowboat or a fallen log sturdy enough to carry me part way. Nothing. Every possibility collapsed under its own weight. The sky brightened slightly, but the light brought no comfort, only the awareness of time slipping faster than I could move. I closed my eyes, breathing shallowly through the pain, listening to the river's slow, ceaseless motion. And beneath that sound, my own thoughts whispered with a new, unsettling clarity. What if destiny had nothing to do with this? What if I had forced meaning into a moment that was never mine to define? I pushed the thought away, though it left its mark like a bruise. The horse stomped again, restless. I placed a hand on his side to quiet him. "Just a little longer," I murmured, though I wasn't sure if I meant for him or for myself. I stepped back from the river and looked toward the southern trail. I would have to keep moving. I would have to find another crossing. I would have to believe, for just a little longer, that there was still a path forward. But as I mounted the horse and turned away from the river's edge, the truth settled quietly into the morning air. I was running out of road, out of strength, out of time, and for the first time, I felt the possibility that the river might not be a barrier, but the boundary of the last hope I had left. Leaving the river behind felt less like progress and more like drifting deeper into a quiet, indifferent world. The horse trudged south along a muddy trail, his steps slow and uneven, matching the failing rhythm of my own endurance. The morning light had settled into a dull grey, washing the landscape in a tired, colourless glow. Nothing about it felt hopeful, only revealing. As we moved, the marsh gave way to scattered trees, then to long stretches of farmland. Wide, empty fields rolled out on either side. Some barren, others cluttered with broken fences or abandoned tools left to rust in the damp air. Every farmhouse sat quiet, windows dark, chimneys cold. It was as though the entire countryside had withdrawn, hiding from something it didn't want to face, or hiding from me. I kept checking behind us, expecting to see soldiers cresting a hill, blue coats, raised rifles, the unmistakable surge of pursuit. But every time I looked, the road lay empty, stretching into a thin ribbon swallowed slowly by the morning haze. Somehow, that emptiness unnerved me more than the idea of riders at my back. It suggested something I didn't want to admit, that the country wasn't chasing me because it feared me. It was waiting for me to collapse on my own. A sudden stumble from the horse jerked me forward. My injured leg screamed. I grabbed the saddle horn to steady myself, breath shaking, forehead slick with feverish sweat. When we reached a fence line, I slid off with difficulty, gripping the post as the world tilted sideways. The fever was worsening. My vision flickered. Every sound felt distant, as if the air itself had thickened. "We just need the next house," I muttered. But the certainty behind that idea had thinned into something barely recognizable. The plan, my grand, unshakable plan had frayed into scattered bits of memory, vague directions, whispered promises, half-formed routes that no longer made sense. Still, I climbed back into the saddle, driven by something closer to instinct than faith. A faint cluster of buildings appeared ahead, their shapes dim against the grey sky. A spark of hope pushed me forward. As we approached, the spark dimmed. It was a small farmstead, a cabin, a leaning barn, a few bare trees. But the place was dead. The cabin door hung crooked, open to the breeze. A wooden chair lay overturned on the porch. The yard was scattered with dropped belongings, tools, a cracked bowl, a coat lying half buried in the dirt. Whoever had lived here had left, suddenly. Too suddenly. I called out softly, "Hello." No answer. Only the wind through the boards. I stepped onto the porch, each plank creaking under my weight. Inside, the cabin was a scene of chaos. Table overturned, clothes strewn, papers tossed across the floor. A lantern lay shattered near the hearth. Someone had fled in a panic. My stomach tightened. Did soldiers drive them out? Or had they heard the news of the assassination and wanted no part of anyone who might seek comfort here? A new kind of isolation took root in me. Not only was I alone on the road, I was becoming a danger simply by existing near others. I limped back outside, gripping the railing as pain pulsed through my leg. My horse lifted his head weakly, as if asking whether we were done. "We can't stop here," I whispered. Mounting again felt like forcing myself into the jaws of pain. My vision dimmed at the edges, but I steadied my breath until the dizziness retreated. The horse stepped forward obediently, but each movement felt heavier than the last. The road ahead narrowed, slipping between darker trees that swayed in the gathering wind. Shadows stretched long across the ground, even though the sun still fought behind the clouds. I could feel the day slipping faster than the miles beneath us. With every foot of earth we crossed, the truth sharpened. No allies were coming. No safe house waited just over the next rise. No part of the plan remained intact. I told myself Virginia was close, that crossing into it would change everything. But the land rolled out endlessly, offering nothing but grey sky and the fading rhythm of a horse near its limit. Breathing hard, I guided him toward the dark line of woodland ahead. The shadows seemed to press inward, narrowing the path like a funnel. My grip tightened on the reins, not in confidence but in resignation. There was nowhere else to go, nothing behind me worth turning for, and nothing ahead except the final miles of a journey I once imagined heroic, but which now felt like a slow surrender to the inevitable. Night settled slowly, as though the darkness itself approached with caution. The trail narrowed between the trees, their branches weaving together overhead until the sky disappeared behind them. The air grew colder with each passing mile, sharp enough that every breath scraped at my lungs. My leg burned with a deep, pulsing ache that made each shift in the saddle feel like a knife twisting through the bone. The horse moved with a tired, uneven rhythm, His hooves sank into the damp soil, leaving shallow prints that filled instantly with water. My grip tightened on the saddle horn whenever he stumbled. The fever blurred my vision, dimming the edges of the world until everything felt far away, as though I were passing through a place only half real. I couldn't tell how long we'd been moving. Minutes, hours. Time had become a faint, unreliable thing. At one point, the trees parted just enough for me to see the faint outline of hills stretching into the distance. A thin curve of moonlight slipped through the clouds, reflecting off a narrow stream ahead. I guided the horse toward it. He drank greedily while I knelt at the bank, splashing the icy water on my face. The shock of cold cleared my head only for a moment, but it was enough to steady me, enough to let me stand again, though my leg trembled beneath me. "We keep going," I whispered, unsure if I meant the words or simply needed to hear them spoken aloud. Back in the saddle, the cold pressed harder against me. The woods thickened as we continued south, the trail twisting between pillars of dark, silent trunks. No birds called, no wind stirred the branches. It felt as though the entire forest had withdrawn into itself, watching from behind the bark, waiting for the inevitable end of a man who had long outrun his purpose. The fever drifted through me like smoke. Flickers of memory rose with it. Ford's Theatre, the roar of the crowd, the blinding glow of the stage lamps, the crack of the pistol. I remembered how certain I'd been, how convinced I was that destiny lay in the pull of that trigger. Now, the certainty felt childish, almost unrecognizable. What I carried with me tonight wasn't conviction. It was weight. Near the bottom of a shallow slope, the trees thinned again, opening into a small clearing. A house stood there, leaning, weathered, crouched low against the earth. But there was light. A lantern glowed softly behind a narrow window, flickering with the breeze. The sight struck me like a blow. Hope mixed with dread, shelter paired with the threat of recognition. Any door might offer warmth. Any door might end everything. I slid from the horse, nearly collapsing when my injured leg buckled. Pain flared white behind my eyes as I steadied myself at the porch railing. The boards creaked under my boots, each groan loud enough to announce my arrival to anyone listening inside. For a handful of seconds, I simply stood there, fingertips resting against the door, heart pounding like something trying to escape my chest. I heard faint voices from within, muffled shapes of sound that carried equal parts caution and weariness. My fevered mind reached for possibilities. Perhaps kindness waited behind the door. Perhaps suspicion. Perhaps a split-second decision that would seal my fate before I could speak a single word. I told myself there were still allies in this land. I told myself that someone, somewhere, believed in the cause as fiercely as I once had. I told myself this house could be a reprieve, just enough to gather strength, just enough to outpace the news still spreading behind me. But underneath every thought lay a truth I could no longer deny. The country was closing in, not with shouts or galloping horses, but with a quiet, patient certainty, with a kind of stillness that knew exactly how this would end. I knocked. The voices inside fell silent. Footsteps approached, slow, measured. The door cracked open, lamplight spilling into the night. A man stepped into view, face lined with exhaustion that hardened instantly into recognition. Not admiration, not sympathy, recognition. And, in that moment, nothing more needed to be said. The ride was over. My strength was spent. The story I had imagined for myself had narrowed to a single, final doorway, and I had already stepped through it.